Today, with Peter, we've prepared a topic that is slightly different in terms of what you might expect, because the key for today's session is simplicity. The reason is, if you counted that will show you how to build a foundation model out of small subset of the data, we won't be doing that. Instead, we'll try to change a bit the narration and the perspective over how to apply various services, tooling, and generate the generative AI capabilities in process of data preparation and also extraction of the value to get quicker results and business outcomes. Without further ado, this year was all about generative AI, stronger than ever before. We were asking ourselves different questions, like how to scale, how to augment that into our business, how to get the value quicker, which model to use. But for smaller organizations that were unprepared or are not running on vast amounts of data, the difficulty was coming with, okay, those foundations model can be easily used as is, but we don't really have enough data and information to kind of fuel them forward. What we have been hearing from executives is actually we do require a lot of expertise and changes in our processes in order to get to a point where it does make a change and brings significant impact. Also, the overall strategy has to be aligned with the business objectives. Taking that into account, all of those discussions and what we have been hearing from those executives were ending up in simple point: where to double down our efforts and how to maximize the return of the investment. On the other hand, generative AI started to grow its impact among multiple areas and multiple domains. As you can see on the slide, the statistics are showing that the best and most significant one currently is visible through the sales, marketing, of course, IT operations, and customer experience or customer operations. This is where we typically start to interact with ready products like chatbots, which are entering our domain, are on the forefront of our interactions. And you can experience how is it like to actually interfere with Gen AI. On the other hand, though, as I mentioned in the beginning, not every organization can quickly plug into that stream, and not every organization can possess enough information, enough data, or structured data to actually get the most value out of it. What we also have been hearing with Peter was that we simply have too small data sets to start working in this domain, so probably let's skip it. That's why, going one step deeper, Peter, if you could change the perspective, how actually we can look at the generative AI.
Yeah, so it's key that we understand a little bit about how these foundational models work. And I want us to take a step back and think of these foundational models as a massive neural network. Now, these neural networks have been trained on huge quantities of data. Now, funny enough, because they've been trained on huge quantities of data, that allows us to get huge amounts of insights out of our data as well. And in addition to that, they are very good at understanding different contexts. This means that people like our sales and marketing teams are also able to apply the context of their organization to the data that we provided. And this also helps us to gain insights into the data as well. So for this session, I want us to have a different view on generative AI. Instead of thinking, what can I give my generative AI foundational model data for it to provide me? I want us to think, okay, how can this generative AI foundational model provide me data to help me get more data, more insights into my data from what I already have? So Lucas, maybe you can tell us a bit more about how we can do that for our businesses.
Sure. So the next step after changing that perspective over, okay, those models were trained on the vast amounts of data is actually how to augment them into our reality. And, you know, everything comes with the effectiveness and complexity of the implementation. So in terms of thinking how to actually use them in actual environment, we can use the in-context learning, which pretty much means or translates to, let's take the model and find the best place to use it as is, or with the prompt engineering, we can actually slightly modify it to our context without giving the access to our knowledge bases. The second part is connected, of course, with the fine-tuning, which comes very handy with even small amounts of data. At the end of the journey, we might think about training or retraining the models using, for example, recently released distillation in the Bedrock. Each of those comes with different effectiveness and cost. So our sweet spots for smaller businesses is actually laying in the first 3 points. And we'll try to look at how to extract that value through simplified data architecture and where it can be applied with a strong precise. So generative AI is our top of the iceberg, and what is underneath is, of course, the data foundation. So in order to move efficiently with it, we have to get it right in the first place and make sure that it will be applied across all our business and all our processes. So let's imagine we are the owners and we are working at the Acme e-commerce shop. We are running since a few years. We do have some of the data connected with our transactions, history, users, products, some of the marketing insights from the recently run campaigns, and all of that sits in our backend system that Peter will describe.
So Acme is a very traditional small business. We initially started off with a relational database as our center of everything. Now, this made things initially very easy to get insights from. We simply connected our business insight tooling directly to this relational database. And this meant we had a full holistic view of everything that was happening within our company. However, as our company grew over time, we found different data sources coming in, as well as CRMs being added to our small company. What this meant is that having this holistic view suddenly became a lot more complicated, not only to connect to, but also understanding how data is changing. And it meant that when we were trying to get information, business information out of our databases, this became a lot more challenging because we could no longer just go to a single data source and run a single query. For example, how many customers do I have? But if I wanted to say, how many customers do I have which came in from a certain marketing campaign, I now had to query not only my CRM, but maybe a relational database and a NoSQL database at the same time. This meant the insights that I wanted to get took a lot longer to retrieve. So how do we go about fixing this? So really what we want is 3 core pillars that we need to look at. We want to make sure that we have a holistic view, so everyone in our company is able to see the data that is available to them. We also want to be able to help reduce the technical barriers to be able to access this data. So typically, if you have many databases, you have to know maybe how SQL works, you have to know how NoSQL works, and if you have some custom software, you have to know and understand how those work to be able to extract data. We want to reduce this and have a one portal where we can access all the data regardless of where that data resides. And then last and not least, we want to be able to manage the governance of this data regardless of where this data is. So to say, okay, I can manage my marketing team, I can manage my engineering teams, and I can manage my business teams and ensure that they have the access to the data they need when they need it. So let's have a look at how this sort of business process would look like in a small business like Acme. So what we would typically do is we would import this data from our production environments to a a staging area. And from the staging area, we can then visualize and understand and get insights about how our production data looks like. Now, this is critical, especially for small businesses, because these data sets often aren't fully complete. They have a lot of missing data, and we need to understand what's the quality of our data looking like to be able to make sure that we can take the right actions for that data to get the insights that our business needs. Then, once we know what we need to do, we can do transformations, we can clean the data as needed, and we can export and prepare the data for our business teams. Now, one thing that's important here is to have some sort of quality control checks. And we'll look into how we can use that in a bit, but what we need to have is some sort of alert to say, okay, I've got a report that my senior executives have received that says we have done 1 million sales this quarter. However, my transactions show that I've only done 100 sales this quarter. So there's a logical misrepresentation in my data, and maybe my data isn't even being understood or interpreted correctly. So I need to be able to set a limit or some sort of control check to make sure that this is not occurring. So we'll dive a bit deeper into how we can do that.
What is important on this data preparation part are two things. One, typically what is implemented is very manual. So this Excel or a single central database or data warehouse becomes a major store that is queried for all of types of the insights. And rarely there is a feedback loop established like on this dotted line where we do also receive a technical insights to how to interpret the data or how they were extracted. This is also, this becomes part of lost information that actually might take away part of the view from how we interpret our reporting in the business side. So now having that in mind, I told you about the simplicity. Those processes look quite standard no matter what size of the organization we are dealing with. So let's try to transform that and let's try to work around the architecture that actually will be much more suitable for smaller teams, teams that don't actually have strong data engineering competencies and can be quickly applied to kind of iterate over and enrich the view with the time instead of doing one big project.
Fantastic. So we're going to have our data sources, and we're going to, for example, let's say we have a MySQL database and a few NoSQL databases. We need to move these data to a single staging area. And for the staging area, we're going to be using Amazon S3. Why? Because it's cheap and it's scalable storage. So to be able to do this, we can use tools such as Database Migration Service, Kinesis Streams, or third-party tools such as Airbyte to be able to achieve this movement of data. Now, once we have this data in the staging area, we need to be able to get insights from this data and do transformations of this data. And to be able to do this, we're going to be using a service called AWS Glue Data Brew. How many of you have used AWS Glue Data Brew before? Fantastic. So let's have a look about...
Before that, Peter, let me ask one question. So on the storage layers, why this structure is especially important in here?
So we want to have 3 main storage layers attached to our data layers. So we're going to have a raw storage layer where we have our direct data being put. Then we're going to have an additional storage layer, which we're going to call our processed layer. And we're also going to have our consumption layer in that same area. And the reason we do this is that we can separate our different areas of data transformation, and we can ensure that we have our processed data in a place where only our business users are able to access it and separate the data from there. So let's have a look now at Glue Data Brew. So I've loaded my data from my S3 staging area, from my raw S3 staging area. And here you can see an overview of what my data looks like. So Glue Data Brew gives me pre-computed analytics about how my data looks like. And this allows me to get a fantastic overview of my data without needing any manual effort from myself. It also shows me the distribution of my data as well. So it gives me immediate insights, which I can then use to action upon. So here in this view, we've seen that I have a column called customer ID. Now, because this is raw data, this is what's actually being shown in the production database. Now, I want to get rid of this, and I want to say, okay, instead of having the raw value that is actually in the database itself, I want to be able to encrypt it with deterministic encryption. And by doing that, I can then say, okay, I can let business users be able to access this data without having to worry that my data or the user-specific data is then accessible through other business departments. So the fantastic thing about using deterministic encryption is that it will be able to be decrypted the other way around. So not only can I encrypt one way, but I can then, at a later stage, if I wanted to know what's happening with a specific user, I can decrypt it back and I'd say, okay, customer ID 1001 had this problem, and I can then take steps to resolve that issue. So here we can see Glue Data Brew provides me a preview of this encryption, and I can then choose to apply that to my data set. So the keen-eyed of you might have realized that through this data set, we had a number of missing values in some of the columns. Now, there's a number of ways that we can go about finding values to input for these missing values. And this process is called imputation. Now, this is a huge study field on its own, but we're going to lightly cover it a little bit. So there's some ways to do this, and one of them is just using an average value. So say that Kate is missing her age. At Acme, we started our customer onboarding, and we didn't require them to put their age as a number. However, later on, we did change this process, and now we have a number of customers who don't have age values in our data set. So we can decide, okay, maybe we should take the average age of all our customers and fill that missing value with the average age. So Kate's going to have her age set as the average age of our average customer. By doing that, we then try to reduce the data skew within our data set. However, there are also other ways to do this. So we can also take the average or the previous entry that was in the previous row within our data set. So for example, with George, he bought an item, but we didn't implement a rating system at the time. So we're going to use Kate's rating as an imputed value for George's experience as well. This helps us create a more filled data set without trying to skew our data set so much. Now, there's also other ways we're going to do that using generative AI, and we'll look at that in a second. So let's see how Data Brew can help us do this as well. So in Acme, we've recently launched our add-on purchases. Now, we can see that, okay, within these add-on purchases, we have a number of missing items for specific users. I want to be able to change this and say, okay, 27% of my data set needs to be filled in with something. So fortunately, Glue Data Brew provides me with recommendations that I can use to fill in this data set, whether that's using the last valid number or using an average or even a custom value. Here, I'm going to use a custom value because I want to have my add-on purchases set as none. So I'm going to say none, and then I'll be able to preview the changes that are made to my data set. And using that preview, I can decide whether I want to apply those changes or not. And that helps me fill in my data set a little bit more. Now, as our process in Acme has changed over time and we have had new developers, we haven't set any standards on how we want to store our data. So some of our data sets, especially on our add-ons, are in uppercase, and some of them are in lowercase. And this is particularly problematic for our business reporting because we're reporting the same product twice, one with socks in uppercase and socks in lowercase. So I can use these recommendations to quickly make sure that I can transform all the entries in this column into a lowercase format. Now, you might see here on the left-hand side that we're creating a number of steps here. And in Glue, we call this in Glue Data Brew, we call this a recipe. Now, just like how you create food in a kitchen using a recipe, these are steps that we use to transform our data to an end result that we want. And by having this recipe, we can then ensure that our data can be reused, and we have the same steps and transformations that can be reused at the same time whenever we need them. So we can then publish this and reuse on new data. Now, so we have done this processing, and now we're going to move this data that we have created into our processed layer, right? And Lucas, you mentioned about having these different storage layers. So this is now going to be where we store our processed data. However, even though this data is now looking a bit better, there's still some intrinsic values that we need to get. So we can use generative AI to help us fill in and provide additional information in our data set. So for example, instead of just saying, let's use the last age value for Kate, what we can do is say, let's have a look at all the transactions Kate has done, and based on those transactions, let's assume an age range for her. So Kate has recently bought high-heeled shoes, she has bought a Taylor Swift t-shirt, and she has decided that she needs a new necklace. We will say that this is common pattern for a female aged between 25 and 35, and so we will choose a random number between that age range. This gives a more deterministic value to Kate based on her behavior and the metadata that we have. And this Bedrock, tools like Amazon Bedrock can help us achieve. Once we have this data, we can now put it in our enriched data layer, and this means this data is ready for consumption.
So, quick question on this side, because so far we were talking about transactional data, relational data that typically sit and reside within our databases. What about the unstructured data and that workflow?
So, even with the unstructured data, we can start looking at using new services like the S3 metadata service to then start having adding metadata to our S3 files to help us make sure that these files are easier searchable, and we can use them also as well through Amazon Bedrock to provide us further metadata. So for example, if we have a contract with a particular client, we can then have these tags and this metadata attached to those tags uploaded to Amazon Bedrock to provide us further information that we can attach to this record for this user.
Okay, so once that's done, in every organization we cannot forget about the security. And we've got simple workflow which gives us repeatable, automated process with, expanded logic thanks to Amazon Bedrock and some of the generative AI capabilities. Now, let's look into the data zone and how actually we can secure that storage and every information that we are processing and having in there between various teams, no matter what size they are.
So yeah, so we spoke a little bit earlier about having this visibility and this governance on our data. So let's see how we can import our data into Data Zone to be able to get that visibility. So first here, I'm going to create a data source directly from this data that is now in Amazon S3. So the fantastic thing about DataZone is that I can choose to upload all my data from my Glue data catalog, and I can then choose which environment I want to use it, and I can publish this data into a business data catalog. This means that anyone in my company can have a search engine-like experience to find data that is relevant to them. And by being able to do that, they can faster find the data that they need. So here we can say, yes, we're going to publish directly to the catalog. You also have an option to say no, that you don't want to publish to the catalog. So this is particularly useful for teams where you need to curate the data beforehand, and you maybe don't want other teams to have access to your data. But for now, we're going to want Acme's at a size where we trust everyone within our company, so we will allow them to have access to this data if they need it. So here we see our business catalog being refreshed, and fantastic, it's there. Now, Acme's made a critical mistake, just like all small businesses. You see, Acme has struggled with documentation. They've got a small number of developers, and having the right documentation and documenting every table has been something that they've really skipped out on. This has meant that the business teams don't know what the tables entail, what the tables are about, and they don't even know what columns to use, because the columns are very generic. So, fortunately, Glue Data Brew has a feature that, DataZone has a feature that allows us to automatically generate documentation for us with one click. Not only does it provide a summary of our table, but it also provides a use case for that table as well. And in addition to that, it provides a documentation for the schema and of every row to help our business teams be able to know what data they need access to and what columns they need and what that column does. So this is a critical part to helping ensure that the documentation and formatting of our data sources is fully complete. Now, last and not least, we need to look at security side of things to ensure that we have a holistic view and we make sure that the right people have the right access to the right data at the right time. Now, we have team one here, well, let's say our business team, our sales team, and they want access to this new data set that we have created. So with DataZone, we allow the business team to be able to go search for the data set that has been added. Remember, the business team does not have access to this data at the moment. So they can see that there's a data set that exists that has been recently added. They can read the summary and they can see the use case for it. They can then request access to this data set, and they can provide a reasoning for that. Now, they can then submit a request for access for this, and this request will then go to the owner of the data source. So let's have a look now at the engineering team. So the engineering team who owns this data is able to go to their data source and gets a notification that says, hey, someone from our business team is now asking for access to this data source. So we can see that our sales team has now asked to get access to this data source, and we as the owners can then approve that access, or we can give them access to only the certain columns or rows that they need to complete their job. So maybe they've requested access to an entire data set, but I know that they don't need access to the customer ID column or the age column, and so I can filter that down and I can say they only need access to columns A, B, and C. So this provides us this holistic overview of our governance layer attached to this as well. Now that we've done this, our data is in a position where it's ready for our business team to be able to get involved. So Lucas, can you tell us a bit more about what we can do on this side?
Sure. So, with simple architecture, we are at a position where we can easily consume what was prepared. And there is no better way of getting quickly plug and play than, utilizing Amazon Q for QuickSight. Amazon QuickSight, for those who don't recall, is business intelligence visualization tool, and with generative AI capabilities, it actually helps to accelerate time to business value. So, as a business owner of Acme, having all of those data sets sitting in there enriched, I want to create a view, basic view that will, show me the business KPIs. I don't have technical capabilities, so by leveraging Q and writing a prompt of, hey, I want to see my sales, please generate a chart for me, I can get to a quick visualization where I decide how the data should be structured and presented. So here on the screen you can see right now that, hey, I do want to show it in a slightly different manner. But what comes really handy on top of that possibility is actually the fact that we can add forecasting into the whole scope of our widget. So we are not only seeing the sales data, but also we are establishing the range where Amazon Q provides forecast for our sales in our business. So, will it be 100% accurate? No, most likely not. But it already gives us the indication where and what might happen, taking into account even our smaller data sets. Then, from there, either through the iterative improvement, with the growth of our business, we can start measuring accuracy of it, or we can start actually to see what other types of the data are actually impacting our sales. Once we've got that, it's time to actually, analyze what other views might be quite useful. So sales data are fine, but as we stick to, our users and we want to understand how they behave, it would be good to actually have a custom visualization representing the age groups and their sales over time. And again, as a business person, I won't write a query. I don't know how to make a function in QuickSight. But what I can do, I can ask Q to actually prepare the function that will categorize and bucket my users and the sales data connected to them. Within simple prompt and few clicks, basically the query and the function is ready, which leads us to this visualization. So top right, we've got sales data by age. We've got all of the KPIs. We know how the business is going. The process is iterative, and it will be automatically updating our data sets, and QuickSight will be refreshing those. So, we've got pretty good visibility. Is this something that enables us the full value and steer us towards the decisions? No. The toughest part is actually to wrap the head around it and start asking the right questions and start extracting the insights or areas where we could actually start making changes. And the biggest difficulty actually is to start writing those reports and analysis. So again, Okay, let's start the video. Okay, we've got it working. Nice. So again, by leveraging Q, we can actually write a prompt that will ask, hey, for my Acme business, please do the report that will take into consideration all of the business metrics that we just produced in our initial dashboard. And additionally, please provide me with the forecasts on what steps or key takeaways we should pay attention to what are the possible action points in given areas, and how to approach to resolution or to new implementation. As you can see, generative AI, again, comes handy. We've got initial reports created within a few seconds that got all of the visualizations, descriptions, including our forecasts that were made previously. And down the line, we'll find the sections connected with key takeaways and action points. This is a starting point. So for small, fast-moving organizations, this might be a material to actually apply critical thinking and brainstorm whether those are the directions that we want to pursue and explore and double down in terms of investment. Or as a business leader, I can take this report as initial form and actually start applying critical thinking by questioning, is it the right thing to do in my business? And adjusting certain points to the extent and to my vision of the organization. With those services and simple steps, we end up with simplified architecture where the amount of the data doesn't really matter, and we can automate the whole process from extraction down to generating business reports in a matter of few clicks and few well-crafted prompts. That's why, coming back to the very beginning, it's about changing the perspective. Generative AI might not be perfect in certain use cases, but if we'll start analyzing our processes, even those technical ones, we can find ourselves in a spot like with calculating Kate's age that, hey, there is a better way of doing it by triggering one function of GenAI, like filling missing data, or by improving how the metadata out of our products or images are actually classified and how they can enrich the transactions that our customers make. So, there are various angles to consider whenever we are approaching to the topic of gaining the insights and gaining the value. That's why at the end of this presentation, what we would like to kind of pass to you are three things. One, small data sets are actually giving the competitive edge and advantage because you can iterate quicker and you can experiment a lot faster without actually generating tons of architecture and complex solutions. Secondly, with modern services like the ones that were presented by Peter, DataBrew, DataZone, QuickSight, and some of GenAI capabilities, we can quickly automate mundane tasks and get to working pilot or MVP in matter of days, not weeks or months. And third thing, the centralization of the data, so getting that data foundation right, is the ultimate goal to actually start the journey in a proper way. With that, we would like to thank you for your attention for today. We'll stay here and outside the room to take any questions and discussions and take the discussions if you would like to share your stories or approach to the topic. In the meantime, feel free to grab our LinkedIn profiles and connect with us. With that, thanks a lot, and remember to leave the feedback on our session. Thank you.
Thank you.